Hi, this is Karen from Soterion, and you're listening to the SAP Security and GRC podcast with host Dudley Cartwright, helping you on your journey to effective access risk management in SAP. In today's episode, we'll run through 5 typical GRC business objectives that are important to many organizations. We'll be joined by industry experts Emile Steyn from Soterion and Quintus Hougaard from Linkies Consulting. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome everyone to today's podcast. So it's important for the organizations to understand which GRC business objectives are important to them, that if they are performing any tasks or activities, that they not sort of spending effort or spending money on possibly GRC objectives that aren't important to them as an organization. So it can just help them just do the planning and put the necessary effort and resources to those GRC business objectives that are important to them. So in today's session, I think we'll just run through a number of the typical GRC business objectives, and we'll just talk through each of those in turn. Emile, do you want to start? What is the first GRC business objective that you are seeing out there that most companies are trying to address or achieve?
Yeah, thanks, Dudley. I think the one that comes up is that having a more SAP secure solution, and that is typically because audits would be the driver of that, where there's a lot of audit findings, lots of segregation of duties that's been identified, certain system settings that's been identified, that typically gets a lot of attention. And if that's being pushed by an external audit, as well as pressure from an internal audit, then it's often a lot of pressure on the company to resolve that. So, and kind of every year, audit comes back, have more findings, and obviously the more repeat findings there are, the bigger the pressure becomes. So that's typically the one that gets the most attention.
And the challenge there is that for many SAP authorization solutions, it does what we use the term that deteriorates over time. You know, as time goes on, whether that organization, whether they're impacted by authorization creep, where people move around internally and inherit wider access as time goes on. So unfortunately, year after year, if you don't administer the authorization solution correctly, it can get worse year on year. So it needs to be a continuous effort to ensure that that solution stays in a secure state.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of, as time, the solution does become less secure, and therefore the audit finding, as Emile was saying, the repeated audit findings become higher and higher. And you normally reach that point where, either the board audit or committee say, listen, we need to do something here. And that's normally the tipping point where a decision is made, listen, we need something, a tool to help us to achieve these objectives. But that's a point where you can't go on, historically.
So then there'll be a lot of sort of system settings that will need to be put in place. But I guess it's also about ensuring that people have been assigned appropriate access or least privileged access, that people have got just enough access for the job functions, and that the role design is not providing people with a lot of sort of inappropriate access. So a lot of the identifying the over-allocated access and ensuring that is removed from those users that just follow that sort of zero trust or least privileged philosophy with that.
I think that what's important for me here is also what was deemed a secure system 15 years ago, 20, 30 years ago when I got involved in SAP, and what's deemed a secure solution now is vastly different with all the compliance regulations that came in. So, and that also add that a system is now deemed less secure than it was 30 years ago with probably the same access, bringing in privacy and anything else, So definitely a journey and more pressure as you go in the future, that solutions must be more secure than in the past.
Yeah. Moving on, Quintus, what would you throw out then as another typical GRC business objective that is important to many organizations?
I think of late what I've seen in the market a lot is with the start of the identity access governance and IDM tools, a lot of emphasis is put more on the improving of the efficiencies to really manage that joiner, mover and lever process more effective and efficiently. So that's definitely something that comes up more, and also the move towards getting more like a business role a process in place. Coupled with that, the efficiency improvement need to take place, whereby regulatory requirements like user access reviews, that is something that used to be very inefficient with spreadsheets, people signing off and spreadsheets going around, no audit proof it was done completely. There's a huge drive to get those user access processes done, and that to improve efficiencies also. So that I would say is something second to me to come to mind.
Yeah. Okay. So improving efficiency is there. So it's not only in the sort of provisioning process, the join and leaver onboarding process, trying to get people assigned the correct access in as little time as possible, but also look at it from how do you also improve efficiencies of those compliance tasks or the access risk management activities that business need to perform. If those type of activities would take an average user 20 hours to perform a user access review, is that considered acceptable, or can that activity be performed in 3 hours? How do you make it as streamlined as possible that business can perform that as effortlessly as possible? I guess that when they do those type of activities, they do them with intent and they're not doing it just to tick an audit box because it's so cumbersome. And I guess while we're looking at improving efficiencies, I guess you can also try and look at it from a support process. When you're looking at the support process from an authorization administration function, how many resources do you have? How long does it take to perform tasks or to fix, any authorization issues, etc.? Does the role design lend itself to easy resolution of issues, etc.? Or is that a very technical, complex process, and you needing a huge number of authorization resources to administer your solution?
For sure. That I think in addition to that, you said it's not just on the access governance, the provisioning access. We mentioned the user access review, but also controls. Because controls can be very resource intensive and very ineffective, if it's not done accurately. So controls is also an area where you need to be more efficient time-wise. And you'll see also with the introduction of continuous control monitoring and a process like that also help a lot with the efficiencies, improve that efficiency side.
Yeah, no, so that's a good point. I think it's just as soon as business needs to get involved in any of those activities, whether it's the control monitoring or the compliance task, if it is complex and cumbersome, and the business users are just not going to do it well. So it's just trying to say, how do we be as efficient as possible in those review processes? Good. Okay, so moving on, Emile, do you want to give us the next GRC business objective that you think is common within many organizations?
I think Quintus already alluded to a couple of times. There is the different regulations that certain companies need to adhere to. So you need to be SOX compliant, JSOX compliant. Obviously, a requirement for you to perform a user access review, or some people would refer to that as the user recertification. And we already mentioned that in a few of the other things. So it's kind of leading from a secure SAP solution. If you have that in place, and if you have your efficiency, that already leads to efficient user access review anyway. The other one that comes to mind is just privacy regulations like GDPR in Europe, where historically there wasn't a great driver to focus on display access, but GDPR places an emphasis on personal and sensitive information, just understanding who's got access to it and is it being managed effectively. That has placed a lot of pressure now on companies to relook at how access is being granted overall, and often it kind of bringing us back to that first point, having the secure SAP solution. Bringing you back to that first point is where you need to spend maybe a lot of time readjusting your roles, readjusting the processes to actually meet these regulations.
Yeah, as Quintus mentioned earlier, in the earlier days, there may not have been as much emphasis, I guess, on securing display access. It would have been assigned to users more liberally. But now, with the introduction of the data privacy regulations, Emile, as you said, like GDPR, all of a sudden, a lot of those sort of wide display roles will need to be relooked at and not assigned as liberally to the users as they were in the past, or at least split those display roles find the ones that have got personal information in them, to create secondary display roles and make sure that only those are assigned to the appropriate people. Moving on to another GRC business objective. Quintus, can you think of any other ones?
Yeah, I think coupled with the previous one of improving efficiencies is the introduction of standardization. It is an old objective that people are trying to standardize. I see many companies doing it very wrong, using the wrong person to standardize on. But standardization is definitely an objective because it does improve the efficiencies. Also, it makes the whole process of, coming back to Emile's point, of compliance easier. If you do have to do compliance activities and there's one business role that's given, to a certain job function, obviously different for the, based on organizational components where there are requirements. But standardization is definitely a drive, and it also helps, to make the whole review process. Emile was talking also, we've talked about the user certification process. All that standardization, there's a lot of benefits with it, but it's a very fine line to walk on standardization, because as we know, with standardization, people are going to inherit more access and they need to do their job, therefore introducing more risks. And weighing that up against the benefits you get from from the standardization process. But I can definitely see there's a drive, and you can see it a lot in where clients are trying to standardize with certain across job functions. Definitely an objective that's coming more relevant now than previously also.
Yeah. So I think, as you correctly state there, that standardization has a touch point with a few of the other business objectives, where you say you're going to you standardize the job roles, that the onboarding process is easier, that when a person joins, there's a predefined business role for the accounts payable clerk, as well as also some of the compliance tasks like a user access review that makes those activities not reviewing many small roles, just reviewing that the person is still performing the accounts payable clerk function. So those type of tasks can be done quicker and easier. But as you said there, to try and balance that, the negative side of standardization is it does increase the risk profile. People generally end up with wider access because you try and create a role for a group of users, and there's always a few people within that group that are maybe doing something slightly differently. So the combined access is slightly wider than if you assigned access directly to the individual user. But it's just that as you say, just trying to balance get the benefits of the efficiencies of that you can achieve through standardization, but also ensure that you don't introduce too much unnecessary risk as part of that. So as you say, a very fine line. It's a balancing act of trying to standardize, but not at the cost of ending up with a solution where people have got very inappropriate access.
Coming back from the business side, a lot of people that as not for the business, I was not aware. They would think, oh well, a credit clerk. So why? And you have a challenge from the business saying, why do they do different stuff? But then obviously a lot of clients will say, listen, our business process. There are certain business processes where standardization is easier to do. Then there's other business processes where standardization is a bit more of a challenge. And then I think in the previous topic, we talked about that if that's the case, rather don't standardize, because if you want to do your other objective, which Emile's touched on, of securing your solution, that being your primary objective, I think here when standardization must come second towards that objective of securing your solution.
So I think it also comes down to the method of standardization, so I think historically, most companies try to do that using the composite role methodology, and when they eventually got a lot of audit findings, it was a big challenge for them to try and remediate in any of that. So I think that's why a lot of companies are now looking at the business role as that method of standardization, just because it can potentially provide them with that flexibility that they didn't have before. So having that flexibility can actually help them on securing the solution a bit better.
And when you talk about flexibility there, you're talking about where the SAP composite role is a take it or leave it. Whatever is contained in the composite role, the users must get, where the business roles, a lot of the solutions that offer business role methodologies allow for partial assignments of the business role. So there's a bit more flexibility of assigning 80% of a particular business role to a particular user.
I'll just add the business role can also then be a container then for access from many different systems. So that again speaks to Quintus's point there of improving efficiencies, where if I'm trying to improve my efficiency for the join and move a lever process, having that business role that can provision to multiple systems is then also a very nice benefit. As it's almost a side benefit, but it helps quite a bit.
So possibly the key takeaway with that standardization is it's so critical that you ensure that the role you're creating for that group of users is based on good data. So if the HR feed is, if you've got 10 accounts payable clerks according to the HR feed, but 2 of those users are doing something vastly different, if you're going to create a role for that now group of users, there's going to end up being very wide access. So when you do standardize, put a lot of effort into ensuring that the people that you're working on as that group are all performing the same function within SAP. Because sometimes we find that the HR records are sometimes a little bit misleading to what the people are actually doing in the SAP itself. Good. Okay. So Emile, do you want to give us one more business objective?
Yeah. I'd say the last one or the only one I can still think of is really enhancing the business accountability, to have business take more ownership of these activities that they are responsible for. Whether that's the user access review, whether that's user access requests, getting them to take ownership of that. And I think the trouble we have seen with that is that often when you speak about authorizations and risks, there's very few people that actually understand that and can interpret that and make good decisions on that. So it is how can we help the business user to perform those activities that they're responsible for? Just how can they perform it more efficiently? So there's probably many different ways, and I think Quintus also mentioned a couple there. It's maybe the way in which you standardize access that can help the business actually perform their activities easier. It could also be the solution that you use. How is it displaying risk information, usage information, business role, the composite role information that I can actually perform those activities quicker?
Yeah, so the challenge that I think a lot of organizations face is that because SAP authorizations and access risks, etc., are so technical and so complex, the business often don't understand it, and they often push it, back onto the IT teams to manage. And historically, audit have always tried to say, listen, access risk is business risk. IT can't be the ones making decisions on it. But because it's an area that comes with a lot of complexity, it is an area that the business often try and push back onto IT because they just don't understand it. A lot of the aspects of SAP security, when you look at transaction codes, authorization objects, authorization fields, also trying to understand segregation of duty risks, some of those aspects can be quite technical and make it difficult for the business to understand. If they don't understand it, they don't want to take ownership of something that they don't understand. So I suppose it's now trying to shift that responsibility from IT to the business, and what are the considerations that you can think of to achieve that shift. And as you said, you've mentioned a few things. You can do that with moving to business role concept, and also trying to put stuff in more business-friendly language, I guess. Yeah. Quintus, have you got
Yes. Yeah, I think, Emile, that it might be a lesser of the, in many customers, a lesser of an objective. But being, seeing this happen in the market, for me, that's actually one of the most important business objectives, because if you achieve that objective, it actually supports all your other objectives. Because if you take about the 3 points of where the tire hits a road, if that business owners take ownership of that, you can improve efficiencies. You're going to know the risks to be monitored better, so more secure solution, because they take the ownership of that. So many often at clients, that's not something that they think of immediately, but I really try to, because from experience, those clients where the business ownership has been successfully taken up by the business and that move from IT, like as Dudley is saying, from IT into business, those are the clients that for me really is the guys that have the best handle on all these objectives, because that's where the tides erode. And so it's a very important objective for me, although a lot of people don't value that, don't think of that immediately. But that supports all of the other objectives we discussed this morning.
Yeah, so for those organizations who do get that right, you can argue that they extract more value from the GRC investment, where those companies where IT is often, if IT is running a lot of those activities, you often find then those GRC or access control solutions are often just heavily underutilized. The IT teams use it more as a back-end solution, with very little involvement from the business. So, those companies are not extracting much value there from their GRC investment. It's more just a back-end solution. So I think Quintus couldn't agree with you more. Enhancing business accountability of risk is possibly the most important business objective, because one, the business users are the better decision makers. If the person is assigned access and it results in a certain risk, it's the business users who should decide whether that risk is appropriate for the business or not. So a company just starts extracting more value if they can get the business users to participate in those activities. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that also for me that, I know the first objective that we all agreed is the securing the solution. And we discussed that that's a lot of time driven by some bad audit reports. Then you have a company that would come to you and say, listen, my focus is to, pass my audit, and that's my tick boxes I want to tick. I don't like working with guys like that, because that's all they want to do. Their focus is so much on passing this audit that the other objectives, that's more important. The guys that come and put higher value on, listen, it's not the audit report. I need to be more effective. I need to secure my solution. I want business to take ownership. Those are the better companies to work with, because they have a better, the business absorb it better and it moves over to them. So that's why I agree with you. It's actually one of the more important business objectives. And also, those clients who got to that realization is the guys. It's a smoother journey going ahead with the GRC journey, because it's not. I'm not just doing the tick to tick a box for audit purposes.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, so maybe just to summarize, the sort of GRC business objectives that were mentioned by you two was: one, to ensure you've got a secure SAP solution; two, to try and improve efficiencies, not only in the provisioning process or the join and mover leaver / onboarding process, but also around compliance tasks and control monitoring, etc. Three, comply with regulations, whether that's Sarbanes-Oxley, JSOX, or any of the data privacy regulations. Four, a drive towards standardization, trying to ensure that certain job functions are standardized within the entity, maybe between regions, etc. That can also have a touch point with improving efficiencies, but make sure you balance that with that it doesn't introduce too much sort of inappropriate access at the same time. And the last one there was just enhancing business accountability of risk, trying to implement a GRC program where the business users are actively involved in GRC or compliance tasks or access risk management activities, and they're doing it with an understanding and with intent, and they're not doing it just ticking an audit box, but not really understanding why they're doing it or what they're doing. I guess then not all of those GRC business objectives will be important to every organization, or some might be important at the moment, and your focus will shift to some of the other GRC business objectives at a later point. So try and understand which GRC business objectives are important to you as an organization, and then try and address or achieve those. And then you can move on to some of the other GRC business objectives as part of your GRC journey, possibly in the following years. Good. Okay. So thanks, Quintus and Emile. Appreciate you joining us once again for today's session. Until next time, thank you.
Thank you.